welcome everybody. We'll call to order the midterm town council for February 19th. With that, we'll start out with roll call.
Kate here.
Tom here.
Brian here.
Dusty here, and we'll ask for who's online.
Earl's here.
And Eric is excused absent, and Lynn might be joining later. Let's please stand for pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That'll bring us to approval of the consent agenda. Is there anything anybody would like to pull off of that? If not, entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Good. Next, we'll have approval of the consent or the regular agenda. Is there anything that's changed off of that? We have a motion to approve the regular agenda.
Motion to approve the regular agenda.
Kate seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That'll bring us to basically conflicts of interest. Anybody have any conflicts of anything that's on the agenda tonight? No. Great. Next on the agenda is public comment, and this is for anybody that would like to address the council on any item that is not on the agenda. Please do so if you're limited to 5 minutes. Anybody in Zoom land by any chance?
No one with their hand raised.
Great. We'll move on to council comments and committee reports. Okay, anything?
No.
We had a great success on Saturday with the first annual Bindi Scholarship Rail Jam at Boyd Park. So about 100 contestants. That looks pretty good. A lot of lessons learned for next year. So yeah, good time.
Nice. Brian?
I'll probably steal your thunder. Just want to say thanks to the Public Works
Department.
they just did an incredible job over the weekend with all that snow. So a lot of hard work and
Earl, do you have anything?
I got nothing.
And I'll just echo what Brian said about Public Works crew. They were amazing. Brings up managers report, and I'll say plural managers.
A couple of things I wanted to highlight, and then I'll let Kate talk. Katie, first, the July 4th is on a Friday this year, which puts our holiday on Wednesday the 2nd. So to get ahead of the curve, I'd kind of like to think about canceling that meeting. If something comes up, we can reschedule, but by doing it now, we know not to publish public hearings for that day, that kind of thing. And I have a feeling everybody's going to be at the concert anyway. We're looking at having a work session on March 5th. Depending on how it goes, I would like to try to start it at 5:30 instead of pull back a little bit. It makes it a little easier for people to get to. But I'm not sure how big that meeting will be yet, so that's to be determined. And then last but not least, the college, the scholarship program applications are online on the town website. You can go ahead and pull those down and apply. March 14th is the deadline to get them turned in.
College or any certificate granting program, trade school, etc. Not just college.
Anybody have any questions
That's
for
it.
manager report? Do you have anything you'd like to comment on, Katie? Or
I just kind of gave you a long list of the projects that I was assigned, and just wanted to give you kind of a background of what I have done and kind of where those budgets are at. So if
they
there's
look great. I had one question on the HDR, which showed we had to actually increase it $280,000.
Yes.
Was that a change order we had on that one, or is that
So
just
from my understanding, yes, it was a change order that was sent to Michelle in February, from my understanding,
Okay.
and then it was just signed before she left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The only question I had was on tank 2 repair. Any further detail on the CDPH obstacles?
I have not gotten anything, and so in the conversations I've had with John Volk, I'm still trying to kind of figure out really what we've been discussing with Jay. Jay has his input on that tank too as well. So we're trying to figure out really which direction the town of Minturn needs to go on that. The obstacles, from my understanding, is that what they want, the improvements that the town wanted to do that were inexpensive are not compliant with the regulations anymore. So those are things that I'm still working with John on.
Okay, not compliant because the regulations have changed.
Changed, yes.
Oh. All right, that's all I have.
Okay, we don't have any special presentations, so that'll bring us to business items. The first business item we have is ordinance number 3, and this is on the second reading. An ordinance amending sections 67-20 and 67-40 of the municipal code, amending requirements for approval of a short-term rental license. Don't know if we have any other questions on that, or
No. I saw Mike was on. I don't know if he's got anything he wants to add to this. Essentially, there he is. Hey, Mike.
Hey. I just wanted to note that pursuant to direction of council at the last meeting, we took out essentially everything with the exception of the provision that allows people to short-term rent up to 30% of their property without having to wait the 2 years. And I think council's justification there was that younger property owners may be able to actually get into the market if they can do a little bit of short-term rental and also live on the property. And so that provision remains in. You can see on Exhibit A to the ordinance the underlined text. So we simply make that partial short-term occupancy an exemption from the otherwise applicable 2-year ownership period. We also included a definition of property. The term appears a few places in that section of code, and we thought having a definition for that term was helpful. So happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Mike, so yeah, that's one thing that spurred me was when we had a new definition of property. I was wondering if there's any other articles out there or sections in our code that have a definition for property too, and I just want to make sure that those are reconciled together.
Well, I am sure that our land use code has a definition for property, and it probably is different. Here, we are using the definition from the utility code because that provides some guidance on how to calculate actually livable square footage. And as opposed to creating a new definition, we decided to use a definition already in our code. Mayor, I'm not sure it bothers me that we might in the zoning code have a slightly different definition of property, because I think for purposes of this particular section of the code, we've been specific as to how that definition is applied.
Okay, well, I'll go with your expertise. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mike and Mr. Mayor, this is Scott. We actually don't have a definition of property within Chapter 16, so you're in luck. No conflict.
All right,
any other questions from council?
second reading, I got nothing.
We'll open it up for public comment. Any comment from the public on Zoom? Hearing none, we'll close public comment and come back to council.
I make a motion to approve ordinance 03 series 2025, ordinance town of Minturn, Colorado, amending sections 6-7-20 and 6-7-40 of the Minturn Municipal Code, amending requirements for approval of short-term rental license.
10 seconds.
Roll call.
Kidder,
Brian, aye. Dusty, I, online with Lynn and Earl.
Lynn, I.
Earl, I.
Passes 6-0. Next we have ordinance. This is going to be determined. It's an ordinance amending chapter 13, 16, and 17 of the intermunicipal code to incorporate into code restrictions in connection to the town water system based on limits of availability, legal and physical water supply. And the request on that is for continuance. I was going to see if Mike would like to comment on that, or if we have anything that we really need before we actually continue it.
Thank you, Gusty. So yeah, this really is, I appreciate the opportunity to ask for continuance on this. This is Mike being a little behind the ball on too many things at once. We anticipate getting this version of the ordinance in the packet for the P&Z tomorrow, or I guess Friday. It will be heard by the P&Z, and then we'll bring it back to your agenda shortly. I think it makes sense to continue this to the next council meeting. If the P&Z were to continue their own review and hearing on this, I guess we might ask you for another continuance, but I think we'll be able to meet that timeline.
Great, thanks. Any other comments from council?
So the March 5th meeting.
This is an ordinance, so we'll just have to open up for public comment, unfortunately.
But I'm just asking the question.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were making the motion, sorry, Tom.
I'm down there, but I can do it. 5 March, that's our target date for council. Okay, check it. Based on your work session desires.
We should be good.
Okay, cool.
Any other comments? We'll open it up for public hearing. Anybody in Zoom land for public comment on continuance on this?
There is not.
Okay, we'll bring it back to council and we'll have a motion to continue.
I'll make a motion for a request for continuance to 5 March town council meeting for the ordinance TBD series 2025 amending chapter 13, 16, and 17 of Minturn Municipal Code to incorporate into the code restrictions on connection to the town's water system based on limitations of available legal and physical water supply.
8 seconds.
Roll call.
Kate, aye.
Am I?
Brian, I.
Dusty, aye.
Earl, I.
Lynn, I.
Passes 6-0. Next item we have is discussion and direction items. It's the Highlands parcel survey and public input from open space. I'll turn it over to Scott.
All right, thank you, Councilman Kanakis. So in the packet, I have provided a fairly lengthy memo that hopefully summarizes pretty well the results from a recent survey and open house, all having to do with the Highlands parcel. So just as a recap, staff was tasked with trying to organize or pull together some public engagement regarding the Highlands parcels 1 and 2 south of the future Bolts Lake Reservoir, which the town has acquired. And the impetus for that, as you know, and just so the public knows, has everything to do with the town's future use of that, which could include the sale of those parcels to generate funds that could be used to offset the cost of the construction and design of a new water treatment plant and or to reduce water rates. So it's extremely important. That's why it was bumped up on our priority list. Hopefully, we did a good job of getting the word out. We did provide some information on the town's website. We conducted an online or paper copy survey in the month of January. We held an open house on January 29th. So the survey was, we got some great response. We had 248 responses to that, both residents and non-residents. Also, the open house, we had 40 folks show up. Thanks to everyone, including council members and planning commission members who took the time to attend that. And, the thrust of that outreach really kind of started with the basic question of, what do you, the public, think that these 2 parcels should be used for? A similar question was asked at, as part of the 2024 community survey, which I think was done in April or May of last year. Same question with some binary answers, open space or development. I tried really hard in this updated engagement effort and the survey to dive just a little bit deeper, but not get into too many specifics because quite frankly, there's a lot of different variations of what those parcels could be used for, whether they're open space, what kind of open space. So we asked questions about, is it open space with no public access? Is it open space with some or limited public access? Or is it just full-on protection for wildlife habitat? That was the flavor of those questions. If people had more of a preference for some amount of development, the thinking there is that sale of those parcels to individuals or a developer for real estate development most likely would generate more funds for the town. But we don't know that either. There's, again, a lot of variations there. So the questions on development were very similar. You know, do you favor very little development, 1 or 2 home sites, clustered development with a lot of open space preservation, moderate amount of development, or max it out, develop it as much as can be accommodated. The overall response that we received was not a shocker to me, again, based on responses that the town had already gotten last year from a community survey. The overwhelming preference, at least by the public that participated, was for some type of open space. There was certainly some support for limited amount of development. We had some write-in comments during the open house that really got more specific. 1 or 2 large lot estate lots where there's a kind of a defined building envelope and the rest of the parcels would be conserved as open space. Those types of subdivisions or developments do happen in Eagle County and elsewhere. So I know that could be accomplished. But again, I think the overwhelming response that we received was either for complete, 100% open space deal, a sale to, and I'm projecting, this is not part of the survey questions, we didn't get into specifics, but I think what that would mean would be a sale to a conservation buyer like Eagle County, where it's bought by a conservation buyer and then a conservation easement is held by an entity like Eagle Valley Land Trust. Or the next level of preference on that open space was to allow for limited public access. So maybe a parking lot and a trailhead and some limited public access. That was the overwhelming response we received. Again, not a shocker from staff's perspective. So hopefully the memo summarizes those results pretty well. There's some nuances there for sure. We did get some write-in comments. And the next step, and what I really am hoping for tonight, is to just get your general response to the public engagement and the responses that we received, but also to maybe start giving staff's direction as to which of those alternatives seem most plausible and that you want us to spend time pursuing. Because I think the next level of effort for staff would mean reaching out and having those conversations with Eagle County Open Space, Eagle Valley Land Trust, or if there was a preference to pursue an option that maybe there is some development there. I think that's going to entail some work with regard to the entitlement side of things, subdividing those parcels, creating zoning for those parcels that allow for that kind of use. Survey work, working with Mike Sawyer and Jeff Spinell for sure. So I'd love some direction on your thoughts on where we want to head with this thing before we spend any more staff time. So happy to answer any questions, and I look forward to discussing it with you.
Any questions?
I just had a few things. First, thanks for putting together the open house. I think the community support and attendance was awesome. I do, just from a personal level, I'm on the board, so I'd like to note to everybody that the Vail Valley Mountain Trail Association board and executive director did write in a comment and say Although while we are in the trails planning and recreation management game, I think from a trails perspective, like everybody sees this as this prime kind of wildlife habitat and would recommend no trail access. So everybody thinks the VVMTA is all trails, but this is definitely something where I think the community is kind of aligned that this would be best as it's adjacent to wilderness. It's got a lot of reasons that it's wetlands, all that. So that leads to the next thing. The Eagle County Open Space Advisory Committee has a few projects recently that have gone through. That board, I understand, I think the funding is in the range of $7 million a year, and they have a pretty big bankroll right now. We kind of saved up projects. They recently turned around really quickly the project, the triple collaboration up on up above Gypsum, and then the town of Vale one that you included in there is working its way through that process. I know there's some more complications with that one, but I think from my perspective, like the first thing we should do is get in touch with the committee and whoever's the lead on that committee and figure out what it takes to submit a project and get that in the works. You can always pull that project, but getting that in the pipeline before any other ideas, I think is super important because they've got money. I think the community, not just in Minturn, but countywide, showed up and said this is what they value. So I think, and then reading their policies and their guidelines, like that property aligns, like check mark by check mark with why they exist. So I'd get in touch with them first. And then I think there is another level of conservation trust, Eagle Valley Land Trust. There's private donors in the area, but there are, especially given its proximity to wilderness, I think there's a lot of opportunity to get some of the nationwide land trusts involved if we're looking for money. Trying to get together some groups to put that thing in permanent conservation easement protection. And I think that seems to be a viable alternative. It doesn't mean that we don't make money on it. I think it can be at best both worlds for everybody.
Can I respond to that,
Yeah.
Brian? So a couple things. Thanks for reminding me that Ernest did submit comments, and I was shocked a little bit at his response, but also kind of pleasantly surprised. Always glad to get his input on things in Minturn. Just so you know, and so the public knows, staff has walked that property with Eagle County Open Space. Marcia Gillis, their their director of that department, and some of their staff members. Marcia was in attendance at our open house, and I did follow up with her after the open house. We're going to try to just talk about what the next steps might be. I think there is some potential interest there. So I'll keep you posted on that conversation. And then regarding the notion of, how much funding is enough, is if we can achieve most of the funding needs, but perhaps not all of them, but we achieve a more strategic goal of, complete conservation and wildlife protection. I'm glad you brought that up because that's also something I wanted to get as far as your feelings on that. Because there's a lot of variations in how this could work. And is the goal of the town, to maximize those funds or to get close? If we know what the figure for the water treatment plant is.
Well, we know the appraisal for the parcel is. I think that's the fair thing to aim for.
And I also think that any private or public partnership type purchase, if it was a land deal with Eagle County or private, you'd have to do another appraisal. So the hope would be that it came in similar to that. So.
Well, based on previous conversations, my understanding was the appraisal was a bit optimistic when you're talking about land trust versus private. And I appreciate the survey and understand the direction, and I appreciate the non-resident input. But as we move forward, it would be ideal to unfortunately put out some rude, honest math in public forum so everybody understands upfront, transparency, completely open what we're looking at in regards to costs levied by residents for these capital works projects that we have in Hopper.
Yep.
I'm all about it. would be thrilled to leave that property untouched. But ultimately, somebody has to pay the bills, and I think most people up here would admit that the Highlands was something that we were banking on as a major principle towards offsetting costs to the town residents for these projects. How we get there, if the land trust can even come close to that, great. But that is not my understanding that they're anywhere near that number that was in that. Okay. Could be totally wrong, so we'll see.
I have a question, Scott. Seems to me that it's interesting you said where there might. What was that?
That was God punishing you for interrupting Kate, who was supposed to be next.
I almost had a heart attack. Anyway, yeah, you had mentioned that the land trust and the open house, the open space committee might have contacts of conservation-minded donors and so forth, where the option of maybe having a little homestead up in one part of the property and the rest would be all conservation easement. And that it'd be nice if we could get an idea of how quickly that they could actually find a candidate for that kind of thing, maybe one in each parcel, and understand what that revenue would look like. And then also I think the next step is we start getting real prices from the Open Space Committee, and also I'm curious to know if we could overlay. You had mentioned to me a little while ago that CPW was also very interested in keeping that in a conservation easement, and that they might have a budget that could help contribute. So if we could maybe, so I'm thinking of getting, if we do the open space route with Eagle County, and then if CPW can kind of pitch in more to make it a better revenue stream, so to help our water treatment plant costs. And then also the other option for finding a conservation-minded person that would basically buy it and put it mostly in a conservation easement.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I think the responses are pretty clear. And I agree with Tom. We need to be honest about what is going to happen for the future. And I think everybody's thinking this might help offset the water treatment plant. But we also have to be honest that, that's a 30-year period. And once you develop it, you can't undevelop it. So there's some trade-off. And however we go about presenting this, we just need to be open and honest about that.
So I'm basically agreeing with everybody else. I mean, the first choice, if we could get enough money, is clearly pure conservation. I don't know that we can. I'm also concerned that we won't get enough money, and that we might then have to make some difficult choices. But I wouldn't want to see more than 1 or 2 homesteads max in that area. I think we should explore with a realtor who specializes in land like this, and try to get a sense of what the dollar value we can get from these other options are, so we're informed when we make the decision. But even if we only got half the value, for pure conservation, I think it might be worth it. But I don't know that we can get that. We need to find that out.
Well, I also agree with everybody what all's been said. I think we're all on the same page, trying to look at what the public response was on it, and it shows, majority wants to have it as conservation and preserved. I'd say that we look at that as the first option, and if it comes back, not good, then we have to look at option number 2, which is maybe, selling 2 parcels off up there just as 2 residents. I like being able to maybe see if we could pull a couple of different agencies together. I know I talked to Devin here quite a while when we had an open house, and he was real adamant about, the elk wildlife habitat there, and maybe Colorado Parks and Wildlife would, chip in a little bit to keep it open space.
Yep.
And I feel that it should just be closed off. If it is open space, we don't have any trails through it, but at a minimum, it would be maybe a partial closure, when the wildlife habitat's in that area, but not have designated trails or designated parking. That's my thoughts on it. If we don't have any other from council, well, it's basically discussion and direction items, but we have some people in the audience if they would like to speak. There are none. We'll come back to council. Any other comments? Oh, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. Just state your
Somebody
name.
might as well get up and say something.
Great. State your name and address.
Lynn Teach, 253 Pine Street. I agree with everything you're saying. I think we've got a ways to go before a final decision can be made. I agree with keeping it as close to all open space as we possibly can. I remember at our open house, there were two or three definitions. One was, remember that? It was on the board. That was over here.
Yeah, I shouldn't I? I think we defined or provided an explanation of what a conservation easement is, and maybe the other one was conservation subdivision or cluster development.
Yeah, but explain the conservation easement, please.
So a conservation easement is a legal document. It's placed over, it would encumber the property, and it would allow certain uses for the property owner, or it would restrict, in most instances, a lot of uses, right? And so there's conservation easement is usually based on a baseline survey of the property, so existing conditions. There's a report done by a professional that really studies and explains the value of the property from an ecological standpoint, whether it's wildlife habitat or wetlands or both, or whatever the main values of the property are from a conservation standpoint. Sometimes it's visual qualities, and other times it's ecological, if that makes sense. So the conservation easement is based on those things. Those are the values of the conservation easement. When it gets signed and recorded and everyone agrees to the easement itself, in the Boneyard case here in Minturn, the town owns that parcel, excuse me, and the conservation easement is placed over that. Eagle Valley Land Trust holds that easement and enforces and monitors the property to ensure that the town of Minturn, as the property owner, is adhering to those baseline values and whatever the allowed uses are on that property. So it lives in perpetuity, and it's conserved in that manner.
So then my question is, if you sold 2 parcels off, that would be owned by the people who bought them. The rest of it would remain conservation easement. Who would own that?
So the people, let's say there's a buyer or 2 buyers, if you had 1 or 2 parcels, those people would own the property. The conservation easement would be held and enforced by an entity like Eagle Valley Land Trust. So they have, as a nonprofit, the ability under that agreement and that relationship to enforce the terms of the easement. They could enter the property. I'm just full disclosure, a board member with Eagle Valley Land Trust. And we have staff members that every year have a list of properties, 38 conservation easements that they physically visit every year to inspect that the property is being maintained under the conservation easement. So the person would own the property, but they would be restricted on use of whatever portion of the property was covered under the conservation easement.
So it would be private ownership, but covered by the easement.
Typically, in that situation, you have a conservation easement that covers or applies to the entire parcel. But what you would have is the allowance under the agreement, followed up or bolstered by a site plan and sometimes a subdivision that carves out building envelopes. So someone who has that property has certain development rights. They could build a single family home and barns and other things within a defined building envelope. Beyond that, they would be restricted on other uses of the property, whether it's, they could probably be allowed for, to be used for agriculture if it was an agricultural property. So the property remains in agricultural use. They can continue the same things that they were doing. In the case of the Highlands, I would think that you would want to allow someone to perform vegetation management, wildlife habitat enhancements, forestry, removing dead things, dead trees, things like that. But yeah, they retain ownership of the property as a private property owner.
And then the other option, which was not doing that, means that the trust that came in and bought it owns it. Or does it go to the?
Most likely it would be if Eagle County Open Space and the Open Space Committee and the Board of County Commissioners thought that was a property or a purchase that fit within their open space criteria, using taxpayer money to buy those parcels. It would still end up being owned by the county in that instance, but there would be a conservation easement, same as a private buyer, that would be held by an entity like Eagle Valley Land Trust that would enforce the terms of the conservation, most likely.
If we're trying to get a conservation easement, I think it's probably pretty important how the thing is structured, because it has maximum value to the buyer if the buyer can donate the conservation easement.
That's correct.
And that increases the amount of money they're willing to pay for these parcels. But I think it's sort of complicated to set it up legally, so it's not that we're requiring this in a straightforward fashion. Mike, maybe you can comment on how these things are done.
Well, I just wanted to have those two explanations repeated here tonight so that anybody who's watching this who maybe didn't make it or just filled out the survey didn't get those explanations. This way, if they want, they can watch it on Sunday night at 8 o'clock on TV.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to talk a little bit about conservation easements. The town can sell a conservation easement or acquire property subject to a conservation easement. So, for example, the Boneyard property that the town owns, that is subject to a conservation easement. Normally, the concept of a conservation easement is in the private context because a private landowner buys the land or owns the land. They then donate a conservation easement to a land trust, which is a charitable organization, and then is able to take federal tax deductions. And in the state of Colorado, there are a limited number of actually state tax credits that can go toward compensating a landowner for the reduction in value to their property that they obtain. That's based on appraisals, and of course, appraisals matter a lot with how the property is zoned. And so sometimes you will find buyers who are interested in conservation easement appropriate property because they both would like to own the property, and usually they want some kind of development to go along with that. But at the same time, they want to conserve some of the important aspects, acreage, special areas, sensitive areas, wildlife habitat. And they then can go through the process of donating a conservation easement. Part of that process involves hiring an appraiser. As I mentioned, the appraiser looks at the difference in the value of the land between what it was worth without the conservation easement and what it is worth with the conservation easement. And that differential again allows a private owner to qualify for state tax credits and federal tax deductions. As I mentioned, the zoning can be very important in a decision like that for a potential conservation purchaser, because if the property is zoned for some more development, that allows the appraiser to then determine that there's a larger difference between the value pre-conservation easement and post-conservation easement. One of the reasons we're going through this process now before any potential buyers have been identified is that if you zone property as what's called a quid pro quo transaction with a prospective buyer, the IRS will deny the tax deduction. So when we met internally to discuss the path forward for this, we wanted to make sure that the zoning we were putting in place was zoning that was done through the normal process of the town, was also transparent, as Scott has identified, and that would survive scrutiny by the IRS if that were to come to pass. Unfortunately for the town, we don't get any benefit from donating a conservation easement because we don't have any income. We're tax exempt as a government organization. So we neither qualify for federal tax deductions nor for state tax credits. And as a result, the process that we have seen on the town side is to move forward with an open and transparent rezoning of the property that does acknowledge that the town does need to get some value out of this in order to accomplish some very important town goals. Put that zoning in place, and once the zoning is in place, put it on the market, and hopefully work to find somebody who's interested in both buying and owning the property, but also then doing the conservation easement as part of the transaction. Scott, does that comport with your our discussions and your general understanding of things as working in the land trust community?
It does. I think it also, I think what it does from this conversation, if the preference is, first for an open space purchase, that was option number one. But it also sounds like, Mike, we might want to move forward with at least the mechanical parts of looking at a zone district designation for these parcels in the event that there isn't a public buyer that is just going to buy the parcels outright.
Yeah, and the council will remember, I mean, the town spent a meaningful amount of money to hire a appraiser who does complex appraisals in the mountains to value this property. Now, that valuation did assume a fairly large amount of potential density at the Highlands, which was the instruction to look at what often in the appraisal world is called highest and best use. But we do have a baseline of what that property would be worth with some robust zoning applied to it. I would think it would not be that we could ask the appraiser for probably a modest additional fee to provide a kind of an addendum to the appraiser looking at the value at a lower density. Something in line with feedback that the town has received through the public comment process. So
the high density, it only came out to about 8.5 million. Am I remembering correctly, Mike?
I think that is correct.
And I think that's low. That was the only part of the appraisal that I didn't agree with.
I will look that up here real quick. And, so I believe one of the members of the council mentioned we could talk with a couple of realtors as to who specialize in rural but high-end mountain property, what they think the value might be, if we were to put it on the open market, offer to pay them a little bit of money and see what that value is. If the goal is to then go around and determine if there is an agency conservation buyer or, combination, whether that's Eagle County, data will be the Forest Service in the current budget climate, but Division of Wildlife, at least we would have a couple of data points from which to evaluate an offer that might be made by an agency or agencies.
So it seems to me the appraisal we got last year was highest and best use, and I think that number was somewhere between 14 and 16 million or something like that. But that also was they had an assumption that it would be connected to our water system, which is a bad assumption. That could never happen. But it'd be cool if we could just have, like, I'm seeing 3 options here that we might want to investigate, and if we could get basically estimates on the value coming through on that from people who know, or if we have to hire somebody to get an appraisal, whatever. I hate to do that because we already got one, but if we could just investigate, just an open space committee with the whole thing under a conservation easement and maybe CPW overlaying some more money so that we can do what we need to do for our citizens as far as cost of water, or second option, finding an individual who would want to buy the whole parcel, and maybe so one could buy one parcel, one could buy the other, or they could put a homestead up there and have the rest as a conservation easement. I think that would be, it might not be as ideal environmentally, but it would certainly come close to being ideal. I think, unless they're party animals, but hopefully, I doubt somebody like that who wants to live in a place like that wants to make sure they have wildlife that they can look at as well.
So I did just find the appraisal on my computer, and the Highlands is 2 legal parcels. The reason is that the Bolts Ditch runs through the middle of it, and that was conveyed in fee title to Eagle River Water and Sanitation District. The appraiser valued Highlands Parcel 1 and Highlands Parcel 2 as what's called low density residential. I'll quickly look through the report as to what that's described as. But the valuations was that Highlands Parcel number 1 is valued at 6.7 million, and that Highlands Parcel number 2 is valued at 9.8 million.
Oh, that's good news.
Yeah.
That could be multiple residences in that description, low density.
I'm looking for the definition of low density residential right now that the appraiser used.
Well, while you're looking at that, there's another angle that we need to look at on this, because as you know, we're hoping to have the financing package for the water treatment plant done by fourth quarter, I believe, of 2025. And one thing to put into our considerations is, how fast can the money get to the town? Because if we can get some money in and pay and apply that to whatever loan mechanism we're using, then it will be less that we're borrowing, and that's really impactful. I think if we can get 10, 12, whatever the money is that we decide on into it, in other words, that would just be a direct payment to lower the cost and the amount of money that we need for the loan. And but if once the financing is in place, then that goes away, and we'd have to come up with some other financial model to, like we had discussed, maybe if we get enough money, maybe we can just just go ahead and pay the difference and keep some of the water fees down for the citizens from the funds somewhere. I forgot what they call it, but anyway, that could be a way of keeping it down as well. But if we can't get it in the money in the bank quick enough.
While that's ideal, I think we previously, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 year minimum was the time frame you quoted before we were going to be able to get to a point of realization of any kind of funds coming in on those properties. Is that incorrect?
Well, and Tom, yes, that's why we're going, through this process, and that Scott is pushing this forward, is that, again, the sale of the property and the ability to realize value is really contingent upon the property being zoned. So,
Quick question about the Eagle Valley Land Trust contact. So I'm going to use like the Wilderness Land Trust as an example. They specialize in buying and conserving property, like in holdings in wilderness. I don't know if this would apply or not, but like who could the land trust help us identify? I mean, I know there's a lot of things I have no idea about land trust, conservation easements, and all these properties. Is the land trust willing to help us, knowing that this was the feedback from the public, willing to help us identify things that we have no idea might exist?
I won't speak for Jessica Fowlis, our executive director, but Jessica has already kind of lent her expertise to Michelle and me separately on this particular set of parcels. And yeah, I mean, that's part of what the land trust does, is, work with sellers and buyers and trying to find those matches, and also providing realistic expectations for both sides on what needs to happen, and values and things like that. Importantly, I think the land trust could help if one of the options was to pursue a private conservation buyer. There's a list of people that Jessica has on her speed dial. So,
That'd be great.
So do you have everything you need up to this point to move forward?
I mean, I would also just like to point out that the survey, as far as I read it, did not ask people what they wanted to do with the money from the sale. So we're making a lot of assumptions here that are probably not wrong, but I don't think it's fair for us to speak on behalf of the town on what we're trying to do with the money that we get. Like, it might be helpful to get some clarity on that.
Which is why I say that upfront rude math. Pretty simple.
But again, even that assumes that everybody wants to use the money we get from this on water, right? Like,
in simplest terms, this is how much it's going to cost to do the water treatment plant. These are the different options for the Highlands parcels.
right, but I'm saying they may not, like, 248 people,
Well, 248, half of those are non-residents. So I understand what you're saying. I'm just driving the fact that, okay, you don't want to use the money from the Highlands for that. Cool. This is what it's going to cost you. And these are the different ways we're going to offset or not be able to offset. Just pointing out, the whole point is all the different possibilities to your point. Okay, back over to the residents. What do you want to do? Are you on board with this? Do you want the funds to go that direction or somewhere else? I'm
yeah,
totally open.
just need them to tell us.
But these questions in this survey do in no way, shape, or form touch that at all, which I know you avoided the detail at this point. So,
I know the survey was tough on it, but at the open house, I think that was relayed to everybody that the money was gonna be used for the water plant, but that was only 40, where you have 240 different surveys, so.
And who did they relay that to us, or did we relay that to them?
I thought we did a pretty good job in the survey to explain that it was going to be used specifically for the Water Enterprise Fund, and in the open house, and in the website content, because that's the direction that staff was given. that this is the reason for the season. This is why we're doing this, because it is unique as part of that settlement agreement and the relationship between these parcels and the Water Enterprise Fund. So I suppose there's a number of different options that people might want to see for those parcels, but that wasn't the direction we were given. So, and Mike, any disposition or sale of the properties, what does that entail as far as a public process with decision by council, public notice? You know, like if the town were to sell right of way, there's always a public process and things like that.
There would need to be an ordinance, but we passed a resolution when we acquired these parcels stating that they were not being acquired for public purposes, which is to say they're not becoming parks or other public facilities. They were being held for potential future disposition or disposal by the town into private ownership. So we don't have to have a public election, but we would have to have, once we received a contract for purchase, we would then do an ordinance in front of the council that authorized the sale of the parcels.
Is that a problem if we want to make part of it a park, like the OCP part that we talked about?
It is not a problem so long as you don't want to sell that property down the road. As Minturn is aware, you own a parcel of land that is called not a park. And the reason it's called not a park is because even though it has a temporary use on it, it is the intent is not to dedicate that for a public use. And the reason is that parcels of land that have been used for public purposes require an election in order to sell. And for these parcels, in particular, the Highlands, and I would think also the property over by the fitness center, it was acknowledged that those parcels likely had different end uses than being used specifically for Minturn public facilities, and we wanted to leave open those options to convey the property at the appropriate time.
Other comments on it, or you feel comfortable, Scott, with direction?
Yeah, Mike, if it's okay, I'll reach out and we can have some follow-up conversations on next steps. And I think, the direction I received was to give us direction on what the options were. And now I think we need to lay out a process by as far as how we're going to achieve the next steps, if that makes sense. So getting with Mike, having a conversation with Eagle County Open Space, laying out a process, timeline, scope of work for staff on a couple of these different alternatives, what it's going to take. So.
And as far as timeline concerns, maybe we could, Scott, you could talk to Marcia at the Land Trust and get her information. I know actually she may have already gone through this with you and Michelle, I'm not sure, but it'd be good as far as the process goes. To me, it's like we need estimates on these three options, if that's the scenario that the council wants to do. And then with that knowledge, we then we can go ahead and move forward with a detailed process where we know where we want to go, I guess. And how does council feel about that?
I'm okay with that. It's great.
Because I'm really concerned with the timeline. You're probably, is anybody familiar enough, Scott, are you familiar enough with the process, know how long it takes to put this kind of thing together?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, what did you say?
I say, with you as a board member of the Land Trust, do you have any idea of how long it takes to put a package like this together to fruition?
No, that one's kind of hard to put an estimate to. I mean,
Okay.
they can take a couple months if there's a bunch of really willing folks that want to put together a deal. It could take a year.
Okay.
So
I would think 4 months would be the short end. I would think on the average end, it would be 6 months because, and that's after the town zones the property and we have a buyer, so a contract buyer. And the
Mike, I
reason
keep
is
forgetting
that
that
in
part.
order to do a conservation easement, there are a number of studies that the prospective purchaser pays to have done, mineral studies and baseline environmental review studies, and then of course appraisal studies that have to happen, and it just takes a number of months for those to be completed, and then for the conservation easement document to be put together.
So 6 months makes it kind of possible, and that we could maybe get some funding down on the water treatment plant.
But again, I want to stress that's after zone A, we've got zoning on the property. You got to get that done first. And that B, that we have a buyer that is ready to go under contract.
Right. I understand. Okay. Well, I have nothing else. So is that, yeah, so the staff okay with the direction like Gussie just asked, with all those parameters in as far as that goes?
Yep,
Okay.
I am.
Great, well, thanks for everybody's comments and input. That moves us to future agenda items. Does anybody have anything they'd like to see added?
Actually, I was just gonna say, can we just make a decision on the July 2nd question Jay had to just take that off the table right now?
I'm in favor of that. The July 2nd meeting.
Anybody opposed?
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, cancel it or unless something major comes up, and then maybe we reschedule it.
I have nothing. Beyond that.
It will be summer at that point.
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully.
Dug out by then.
You just guaranteed a foot on July 1st. Way to go, Jay.
Well, the last thing on the agenda is a motion to adjourn. Do you have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.